Hi, my name is Elena Nezhinsky, and I'm here to talk about things that is interesting for me. And since I'm very single-focused, I'm not really multitasking. My mind really loves focus. And at this time of life, what's interesting for me is how we as a human beings get disconnected from full life force, from full aliveness that we are born with. How we get disconnected from that and what we do. And seems in my own experience, what happened is I was very suppressed in my humanness, in who I am as a human being. And maybe one day I will describe how it happened, because by exploring this subject, by exploring it, living with this suppression through a great awakening experience, a humongous mind expansion that happened to me. I remember it, and I looked into some times in my life where I was actually disconnected from the fullness. And to compensate for that, there was an identity created. And it's not just one identity, it's different kinds of how we call it, I call it roles and personas that I used to live in. And when I talk about this, about myself, I hope that something will resonate with you, and you will suddenly recognize that what I'm talking about, it's not just about myself. It's basically every human being who comes here in this form. It's a greater consciousness focuses itself in this form, gets limited to this kind of expression through the form of a human being, through the mind of a human being. And this is nothing that is only pertaining to me. Everybody in their full expression, it's absolute aliveness, love, limitless love, limitless aliveness, limitless awareness. But we don't live that, because this form limits the full expression. And for some of us is very painful limitation. And it happens in a different ways, and for many of us happens in a very early childhood. there is a lot of people who believe that what they live, it's they are, but they are living this limited identity. And as I said in my last video, my first attempt to start this series, it is absolutely fine to live the limited identity. It's just a life trajectory to live this life of limitation. It's what consciousness is exploring in being limited in this form. But at some point, for some of us, we have this we lean toward wholeness. We lean toward ease, toward clarity. We lean toward this in different ways. In my case, I lean toward wholeness through the idea that if I wake up from the limitation of the mind, if I just go toward what called spiritual enlightenment, then at the end I will find a relief from being limited. I will find an ease. And many who choose this path, the spiritual path, again, it's not a choice as well. It's what happened in life, if that's in your trajectory, that you meet somebody or you hear some texts, the spiritual teachings, and you think, this is it. This is what will make me free. And in a way, it is true. It is true that awakening to the higher, to the fuller knowing who we are, besides being humans in this body, awakening to our nature of being spiritual being, how other people call, or awareness, consciousness, the speck of higher intelligence. In a way, to waking up to that knowing does free the human mind to some extent. Why I say to some extent? Because after the full realization, consciousness still focus back into the form, into the limited thinking mind to live through this particular form. This is the nature to be as a consciousness in the form. At the same time, the mind was developed through the whole life, making all these neurological connections together. And those neurological connections, those neurological grooves, they still in the human brain. And they still fire the neurons based on the old habits. So now imagine you had absolute expansion, a freedom from this form, a freedom from any conceptual knowledge, freedom of any built-in from the whole life of repeating beliefs, freedom from habits of the mind, freedom from senses, freedom from reactions, freedom from any human faculties. And then coming back, that attention comes back right into the human form with all that limitation and all that constructed beliefs, habits, reactions. The system always leans to a balance, to some homeostasis. From a huge expansion to back to contraction, it's a lot of ground. A lot of contrast. It's a big contrast. Coming back with focus, diving into the human form, looking through the human eyes, feeling through the human heart, sensing through the human body. We're coming back to a lot of uncomfortable, contrasting movements that can happen in the body, because the body trying to go into the balance of basically not having access to the human body and then being fully back. So what I described is what happened after the experience of full expansion, awakening, the spiritual awakening. And I described my experience, so it can be all kinds of different experiences. I only can talk about myself in this case, and maybe some others whom I know, who shared with me their experience. Then the real life of awakening starts. It does not end with the experience. It starts with us recognizing our nature. It starts with recognition. The awakening starts with that. Because all this organism now have to adjust to the new knowing. That recognition and knowing of our true nature shifts everything in a form. It shifts everything. How it shifts, we don't know. But the changes are dramatic. It can be very positive, what we call positive. It feels that there is such a love for everything, because we saw who we are. We love everything we are in. And at the same time, it can be very uncomfortable to come back focusing in the limited form with all the old habits. And the true humbling journey begins. And some call it dark night of the soul. It seems like it's night. It's dark. And we again lost. Lost now in to that expansion, the knowing who we are. We know who we are, and there is so much pain because we can't be who we are, limited by habits. Simple as that. The mind, habits. We meet somebody and we want to be loving and open with them, but the whole organism contracts and we have no control of it. The only what changed that we are aware, very much aware, that the contraction is happening. It's very painful. We see the character who contracts. We have a little space now. Well, it's not a little, it's a space where we see this all dynamic which going on with human. And with time, we start to see that so clearly. We start to have the feelings that are the feelings that we were disconnected from the beginning, the feelings of love, compassion for this very human who is experiencing these difficulties, this pain, emotional pain. If before we were experiencing the emotional pain and suffering and we didn't understand what was going on, because we were so identified with that character, we were so identified with that persona we were playing. Now it's different. Now there is no identification with the character. We see it clearly. We see that its persona suddenly making itself seen, present when we meet others and we contract. It just for example. Now we see that. Not through our eyes. It's just awareness of what's going on in his face. We see how we get into a specific role with all the attributes of that role were built long before, and we communicate through that role. Now we see that. It's not even we have a compassion, there is a compassion for that process of that human being living her life or his life through that role. And maybe I am talking in a way that maybe it's not connecting with some people. It may be, because I know how strongly we identify with the roles, how strongly we think that that's who we are. Total identification. So when I talk about myself like this, just to make an example, there are many who would hear this and they would say, oh, okay, I understand, she was in a role, yeah, but I'm not. And that's okay if there is no awareness. I'm just attempting to describe my experience, so in those who are ready, they will recognize that. They will resonate to that. And suddenly they see how they open the door, go out from their house, and immediately they're in the role. I'm just making an example, because you can be in your own house and be in a role. For some of us, it's more visible. Maybe because it's so painful not to live yourself fully. So it's more visible, and we are more ready, to see that. We are more unhappy to live like that. If somebody out there is happy to live what they live in their role that they created, that's fine. I wasn't. So we live in this distorted reality, pinched from wholeness who we are, pinched from full aliveness who we are. And there is this loop that reinforces itself with the set beliefs, thoughts about who we are, this, who I am. And some have titles: a doctor, PhD, MD, engineer, any kind of scientist, dancer, actor. And some of us don't even have these titles, but we have set ideas about ourselves, usually with a very low self-esteem, what we call in a regular world. Because we don't see ourselves, we don't know ourselves in our fullness. We don't have a love, the full love for who we are. And this is what I will attempt to record in short videos, and will try to make it very, very clear how to notice that you are not living the fullness who you are, but some limited version of it. I want to look what are the mechanisms of this human journey, and how to allow that fullness to live through this limited form. And that's what is my big intention for these videos, to make it clear, these dynamics, so you recognize it in you. And that recognition is huge. That recognition will start the whole matrix of movements to change the limited perspective of who you are. And I want to look at from all different perspectives. So some of you will connect to one perspective, and some of you will connect to another one. And I'm not talking something that will reach to everybody. The only what I can do is keep unwrapping this subject. And maybe at some point, some word, some sentence, some example, some metaphor will reach something in you. And suddenly the clarity will be there. The clarity is an amazing, amazing mind state. In that clarity, there can be a shift worthy of the whole human life, and it will change whole being. And this is what I am intending for anybody who will be watching my videos, to have a real transformational experience within themselves, within you, that will change your life, to experience yourself more fully, more alive, to start to fully appreciate yourself, start to fully seeing yourself, start to experience this love toward yourself. It's a life-giving experience to love yourself fully, without reservations, without but something else. But I want to change something. We will look why we constantly want to change something. Why we can't accept ourselves, why we can't love ourselves. What is the mechanism of not acceptance? What is the mechanism of being cut off from the feeling of love that is right here toward your own being, which is here? How this happens? So we will talk about all of it and more, because I was waiting for myself to get to this clarity in myself, live it completely, so I will be able to talk about it in a very simple way, so it facilitates transformation in you. Thank you for listening and for taking in and giving me the opportunity to do this work, which is my life work. Thank you for listening and giving me the opportunity to do this work,